Hello, everybody. Welcome to our, let's see, No Gods, No Masters, No GMs panel. My name is AC. I go by they, them pronouns. With me today, I have Viditya. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Viditya. I go by he, him pronouns, and but I make a lot of games, and a lot of them had to be GM-less.
As well as Jay Dragon.
Hi, I'm Jay. I don't really pronouns. And I also design a few games, some of which a couple folks in the chat seem to like a bit. And yeah, I write them and I publish them, and that's my shtick.
Yeah, I guess I should say I work for Indie Press Revolution. I distribute games, so
Mhm.
that's what I do.
We have all aspects
Yeah,
of the publishing pipeline here.
Oh, I love
It's
it.
Mhm.
fantastic.
Mhm.
So yeah, I say just start off with like talking about why you guys like GMless games, why we're in this panel.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hmm.
Whoever wants to take
Uh,
it, I
I
can go.
I feel like yeah. Please go for it.
Unless,
Yeah.
unless you okay. I love GMless games. I had uh, group of a gaming group that completely fell apart just because absolutely nobody wanted to GM, and I think it's just like the most stressful thing in the world to GM. As much as I do enjoy doing it under like very specific circumstances, the general like my day to day life, I don't have the just energy to GM. And when I got
Mhm.
into the indie tabletop gaming sort of scene and found all these GMless games, it just completely like it's like seeing a new color. Like it completely
Mhm.
changed my perspective on what a tabletop game could be and like the potential. So
Mhm.
yeah, Jay, if you wanna.
Yeah, I really got into GMless games. Like, I didn't start actually playing D&D until pretty late into my like experience role playing. And there's always I do enjoy playing the GM, and I still enjoy playing the GM. But like for me, it's almost like I enjoy playing the GM, but like and I get really frustrated playing a player in a GM'd game because I feel like there's like that element of like freedom that is given to the GM, the capacity to say like this is what the world is, and for everyone else to be like yes. And then as a player, you don't have the ability to like give people that. And I like writing games where everyone has the ability to give that, like that same uh like it's not a game like my games don't like I oftentimes think of it as like my games are like it's less about like like I am eliminating the experience of being a GM and more about like I want you to have it also.
hmm Oh yeah. uh,
Mhm.
I can't actually remember how I stumbled into GM-less design. Because I did start with like playing like D&D and Pathfinder. I
Mhm.
taught Pathfinder. I think it actually this is kind of what it was, right? I ended up
Mhm.
teaching Pathfinder to a bunch of friends when I went to college. And so I was like GMing a bunch of different groups and stuff like that. And then I realized like it's not that I hated GMing, it's just the way I GM'd was to distribute the work to other players, and not
Mhm.
because I was
Mhm.
like and like I didn't like prep. I like really didn't like prep. I actually ran a
Mhm.
lot of
Mhm.
modules, like a lot of like
Mhm.
small modules because I was
Mhm.
like, well, it's here and then we can just do whatever we want later. Um
Mhm.
and so like it kind of naturally came to be. And then similarly what you said, AC, where I was like, I think I can't remember the first Jamless game I saw, but I was like, "Oh, huh. Oh, that's
Mhm.
cool." And
Yes.
then so it started to kinda, like, form where I was like, "Well, my natural favorite way of playing is maybe I'm still kind of a facilitator, but also kind of a player." I
Mhm.
love to give my players more opportunity to surprise me, like it shouldn't just be me that's pushing the narrative. It's like, what if my player does this thing? And you see these GM tips all the time, where it's like, ask your players what they see and what they smell. And I'm like, what if a whole game was that? And then it just kind of I'm like, you're basically there. Like, just get rid of the GM.
I feel like for me, my
so
the moment I had where I really GMless stuff clicked for me was in a Abe Mendez at Abe Mendez on Twitter. I adore them. We're college friends and also game design buddies. They were playtesting one of their first games, and they there was a mechanic in it. The travel mechanic was through this surrealist Dada landscape, and the way it worked was the one player would introduce what the landscape looked like at the start, and then you'd go around the table, and each person would say one thing that changes. So the clouds give way into giant floating mushrooms with tendrils leaning down to the ground, and then another player might be the grass becomes these roiling hills, and so you collaboratively move the world along in a way that where you end up at something that none of you could have predicted individually, but also you have a say in it, but also everyone has a say in it. And that was for me. I played that and I was like, oh, that's it. I get it now. I get why it's good.
God, very good.
Mm-hmm.
Abe's design, just to echo again, Abe's design is always something that shocks me, and
yeah,
we go oh shit, I need to think about this. I have to be thinking about that.
Yeah. I'm typing their Twitter into chat, and please go follow them because I adore them so much.
A GMless game to talk about Abe's game real quick, but I need more people to know about Yarn Spinner. Not enough people know about Yarn Spinner.
Yeah, absolutely. This entire panel could be recommendations of good games on Itch.
It's what it is.
Good GMless games on Itch, yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Oh, God.
No, please talk about it. I don't know what Yarn Spinner is, so please.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Yarn Spinner it's a GMless. I mean, it's GMless, but it kind of is a whole other thing. But it's a framework of how to stitch different games together. And in it as itself is a world building game that then creates threads that you can use to play other games. So it's hey, you want to play I played some Yarn Spinner, and it was we started with Dialect, and then we moved to Street Magic, and then we moved to we played what is it, not Forgotten Lands, what am I thinking of, it's a Sundered Lands. We played a Sundered Lands game, and they all were in the same collective setting that was facilitated by Yarn Spinner. Very good.
Yeah. I feel like it's a really good little bit about why what do you call why GMless games are so interesting, right? Because I think they are sort of a thing where again, what you're ending up with is more than what you started with, and in a way that maybe none of you anticipated.
I mean, because a lot of those games that we played were GMless. Actually, it was really fun. We didn't dip into a game that needed a GM, and it was such an intimately collaborative experience every time we played it, because there wasn't a power dynamic, and things like Dialect work, I think, as a GMless game because you can kind of have somebody who we had somebody who told us where to go, but or how the game works, a facilitator of some sort, but there's when I guess I'm sorry, I'm gonna be skipping around things, but the thing I love about GMless design is that everybody is there, right? You're kind of always you're always asked to participate is the thing. I feel in GM'd games there's this opportunity where or the camera can focus on somebody and a lot of other people are just kind of waiting. They can be invested, but they're kind of mechanically waiting. But a lot of GMless design builds into its framework, if the camera's not on you, you are still a part of the scene. Like it kind of has that like troop style or like a non-monogamous character built into it, where it's like, okay, even if we're focusing on like Jay's character in a scene with Jay's character, you know, AC and I will like we play the street vendors or the vibe or like, you know, like singular, you know what I mean? Like we're still called upon to participate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the things I love is like that was the thing I was thinking about a lot with I was just thinking a lot about the way like I feel like a lot of games like up until very recently, and I think we're still kind of only just barely starting to poke at this, is the way in which like games exist as like there's an idea within the game about what it means to play the game. There's a beautiful moth in my room. Anyway, about what it means to like play the game. And I think that when you exist in a game with a GM system, I don't personally agree that like that the model of having a GM is like, you know, sort of like a power dynamic in like a fundamentally dangerous way. But I do think that like it is a mechanism that silos players into ways of playing the game, and it builds a framework in which there is a right and wrong way to approach the act of play. And I feel like GM-less games are like a really important first step to me in terms of like what it means to say like you know, I've played games of Belong Outside Belonging where like one person is like really into the setting elements, right? And like they kind of through that become almost like a pseudo GM role, but like that's because they want to and the other players don't want to as much, and like they're finding themselves into that rhythm, but in a way that like is conducive and like collaborative and like building on that, you know?
100%. I like that. That kind of mentality is what really excites me about GM-less design, and this is like we're gonna move into, I think, maybe weird territory, but I'm excited that you're here with me for this today.
Yeah.
To promote myself for a second, I made a game which I'm really proud of called 6E GMless. It's a hack of 6E, which is made by John Bats. 6E is a great system, and then I just made it GMless, but I like threw a bunch of my own GMless design ethos into it, and it kind of like stems from exactly what you were just like that example that you were talking about, Jay, where it's like sometimes like a GMless game does not, and a GMless like the mindset that it breaks is not necessarily everybody is the GM or nobody is the GM, you know what I mean? Like it's like who has narrative weight and mechanical control, and like this it is about distribution, and like 6E GMless's whole thing is that you like create canvases. They're called canvases, but they're basically just like a blank slate that's like you have stats that are colors, and you just name it what you want, and it can be anything that exists in the narrative. So you could be like, oh, this canvas is my character, right? Like this canvas is like the ranger of the party. But then somebody else at the table is like, well, I kind of don't want to control a character. I want to, this canvas is the town that you are currently in. And so like you get to choose and build like what parts of the narrative you like. And that's like kind of the fundamental of GMless games that I want people to try and break is it's like, it's about, you know, having fun.
Yeah. Wow. Whoa, really? Games are having fun? Yikes.
I don't know if I've heard that before.
What do you call? Yeah, oh, go for it, AC.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that's totally like I believe the first GMless game that I ever played was The Quiet Year by Avery Alder. And it was just like such a complete shift, because before that the only thing I'd played was, let's see, D&D, and I think a very, very short Monster of the Week thing that got like immediately shut down because just the person didn't want to be doing the thing they were doing. And the ability for everyone to contribute to it and make it like completely collaborative. And I don't think that games that have a GM are like less collaborative in any way, but
Mhm.
GMless games really give everybody the opportunity to, you know, work together in that very just extremely good and
Mhm.
uh, like facilitates the type of play that is always ended up with the best sort of results for me, with like fantastic stories and surprises that end up happening.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Mhm.
And
I
also,
think-
I'm gonna
yeah.
go yell at the person who's on a phone call in the other room. Hold on.
I think a lot.
Jason, I can hear your phone call. They can hear it on a thing.
We can all hear.
God.
What do you call? I think a lot about also, and this frankly, this might even just be divulging from GMless games just into my own little like passionate feeling thing that I've been really on for the past month or so. But like the way in which like I guess I think one of the things about GMless games that's really exciting, I think also like an approach that again I think we're starting to figure out is that like you don't need to dictate what play looks like, and GMless games don't require dictating what play looks like in the same way that like GM'd games do, because a GM'd game I think is a level of invitation with structure. And I guess crucially what I keep coming back to is I recently stumbled upon the fact that there's a group of people who have been writing long-form fan fiction about one of my games, Sleepaway, and that they've been just going back and forth on AO3 writing fanfic about it. And it seemed to have started with a game, but it's become, and like, you know, I love it. I haven't read it because I feel like that would be like boundary violating, but like it seems to be like it started with a game, but it's become just like this like story they're telling collaboratively, and that is a game, right? Like they're playing Sleepaway, right? And like just as meaningful of a mechanism as like any other way you can approach it. Or like I always come back to like one of my friends who would always be like really enthusiastic, like I want to play in this RPG you're running, like I want to, you know, like let me show up, and they'll show up and they're really sleepy and they'll draw drawings of the characters and they'll like take a nap. And that's play. That's still play. And I feel like when you've got a game that says this is the role of the people in the games in terms of moderating and controlling and navigating the conversation, you lose sight of the ability to have ways of play that go beyond what the creator anticipated. You know?
Oh, yeah.
Also, sorry, really quick. Guys, I'm so sorry. I meant to mute myself while I was yelling, and instead I muted myself when I stopped yelling. I did not mean to do
No worries.
sorry.
You're good.
It was a delightful little moment.
Yeah. This is what GMless play is all about, everybody.
Yeah.
See, your coworker is a part of the game that we are playing, right?
Yeah.
The game of life, you know. Yeah, go for it.
That's like a really like fascinating kind of mindset. I don't think I've ever really hard thought about something like that. About how like it liberates kind of what it means to play and interact with it.
Yeah.
That's super interesting, because I guess like when I think of, well, I guess like GMless games to me in my brain kind of start with a moment of design where it's like, because you don't have one person, like because you don't have like one person who like you can shoulder the weight on, like as a designer, right?
Yeah.
You're assuming the role of somebody who will kind of know what's happening. It's a lot more structured, right? So it's like, oh, a GMless game kind of needs structure to facilitate to continue forward. And I'm like in the process of like messing with that and like breaking that. Like, well, you know, like not really, right? And it's just exciting for me to be like, oh yeah, like what if I just what if it's just like it's a game that, you know, changes how people, like depending on like how somebody wants to interact with it rather than what I've said. And that it's really cool.
A lot about structure because sorry AC to cut you off. I just because I've been thinking a lot about structure in terms of like I really, because like I've written, like I wrote Sleepaway, which a little bit of Sleepaway was kind of making an argument about what structure can look like in a GM-less game, and like having the game be a player at the table, or like inviting a thing within the game to play with you at the table. And then Waterhome has like this like almost religious avoidance to structure. Like, like the actual, like what most game designers call rules are, to me, almost like a vestigial extension of what the game is doing.
Right.
And so I feel like the key thing about GM-less games is that, like, when they are very structured, it is because, like, I guess okay. So this was the thing I was talking about on Twitter, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it, actually, because I feel like you've got good ones. But like the difference between a game where like you are playing the game through the game, like when you've got a game that's very structured, the play is like through and into like that game, and then a game that you are like looking at and kind of iteratively generating a game out of. And I kind of feel like those are both approaches that exist in GM-less games that I think also exist in GM'd games, but require a different tact in GM-less games. I feel like maybe I don't know why I'm second guessing myself on that statement, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. Like, you know what I mean? Where it's like it's like street magic is like a machine that you're like, you pick up street magic and you put something into it and street magic comes out.
Yeah.
Whereas like Wanderhome is like a book that like you like take and you like extrapolate Wanderhome.
No, totally.
Interesting.
I mean, I can definitely say which one of those I mean, I think that it's so, like, I definitely can say that I like the secondary one better, probably, because I love that sort of creating stuff and going off on things, because while I have find myself having a difficult time coming up with ideas, when someone offers that sort of base work for you to work with and then run with it, like that's where I can just like go forever. And so I think it's very cool. And there's definitely, I can tell the difference that you're talking about. And I think it's like, for different people, for instance, my younger sibling, I would say the first one, because they need that sort of structure to be able to sit down and focus and play a game. Because if it's just like them going off, like they will also go off, but they will wander off of the table, like they will leave the sort of game space, which does not necessarily mean that they're not playing the game. But if you're trying to play the game with them and they just sort of wander off, it's sort of yank them back. So
and
yeah,
to clarify,
I can see the difference you're talking about.
And to clarify, I think like games like Street Magic or Microscope, like it's not that they, or even Yarn Spinner, like it's not that you like don't generate your own stuff out of it. I just mean like the mechanisms exist. Like even the Quiet Year exists as like a way to like I don't know. I'm really struggling to articulate it, but
so like I'm trying to think like I feel like it's this difference of a GM-less game. So like for like when I make a GM-less game, or like when I make games in general, most of them are GM-less. I'll generally be like I'll focus on the mechanics because or like there is a story that needs to be told. Needs is a strong word, but like in certain GM-less systems, like it's a GM-less system is good to tell a story because you are directing a bunch of people to kind of follow a framework. And so like a GM'd game kind of, I feel like, is freer to kind of let people do what they want because there is like a little bit more of a negotiation where like you kind of have just the one person that can say yes or no in a degree, and again, not in like a bad power dynamic thing.
Totally, yeah.
This isn't me going like food GMs, but there is like a difference in that. But then like GM-less games that, like as we were talking about before and things like that, where it's like, oh, it's something that you can just explode away from. Kind of, I think that works mostly only because of trust at a table. Like if we want to move, like is when you play, I feel like when you play Wanderhome, with strangers is probably going to be a very different experience that's a lot more close to the book than it is with people you're comfortable with, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like you're maybe more like, oh, I don't want to push it, or I don't want to do that because like there's a lot of like there's a lot of like ways that you maybe don't want to push the boundaries of like what the game is telling you to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that seem like a good
Yeah,
kind of like
I completely agree. And I think an interesting thing is like with Wander Home, and I think I don't know. Actually, I just talked about this in my Lyric Games panel, which was, of course, 30 minutes ago and not recorded a week and a half ago and only just played now. Of course, yeah. That's why I'm wearing the same exact outfit and the same lighting and everything. But I do think games are like what do you call it? Like there's a way in which like a thing I've been thinking about is like the way in which GMless games, like especially those from the belonging outside belonging like family, like those those have been like those like that exist in conversation with Dream Askew and Dream Apart, I think are really heavily influenced by like the way in which the text implies and states a world and the rules of that world, or even like in the case of Dream Askew specifically in Dream Apart, there's like the tips and the agendas and those like lines of text that have no mechanical function but are instead like a mechanism that shapes you. And like even though there is no rule set, like even though there's no rules that are like you must follow these tips, the existence of them on the page shapes you.
It's such a really fun like it's just such a fun like powerful thing as a game designer, I think. To kind of like, this isn't necessarily a GMless thought, but it's like you put it on the page and it's like, well, it's a guideline, and then that you don't have to follow it, but like it gets people to think about that, it gets people to follow it, which I think is like super good. I have a confession to make in live. I've never played a Belonging Outside Belonging game yet. I've like read a bunch of them, and I like am writing.
I mean, confessional time. Also, I wrote Sleepaway before I played a Belonging Outside Belonging game. I wrote the first draft of it, and then I was like, I need to actually play Dream Askew before I can start again.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think also like that, like like in a lyrical sense, or at least in like a game design as generative text, right? Like if a way of playing it is to read it and is to imagine play and is to like invite play, then like, and if a GMless game isn't making a claim about what position you need to be in order to play the game, then like by being invested in it and reading a bunch and writing your own, isn't that also playing a Belonging Outside Belonging game, right? Like
basically, yeah. I played it here.
Exactly. I think one of my favorite things I've ever stumbled upon on the internet is there's like this forum that I could probably never find again, where it's just all these people talking about how they had made games, not only GMless, but like one player. So just like any game you can think of, any tabletop RPG, they had made it one player, and this is where they were like chronicling them playing this game as a one player game, which is just fantastic.
I stumbled on that. I remember being in like 2016. I would lurk on the Apocalypse World forums, and there's one person who was doing that with Apocalypse World, and I was watching because I couldn't get it at the time. Like I couldn't fathom how they were playing it as a one-person game, and then it was like it like made sense to me as I watched them play it. I was like, oh, I get how you get to play a game that way.
I think that's
like,
really, yeah. I've been asked like maybe twice now. People are like, "Oh, can 6e GMless be considered a solo game?" And I say no. I say no, but I always say like, "This is why," but don't let that stop you from doing it. Like like if you can figure it out and you get
yes,
fucking do it. Like, oh, that would bring me so much joy. But like,
yeah,
it's like things like that where I'm like, oh. Damn, how'd you do that? Like, how are you able to engage with this that way?
I say the same thing about Wanderhome, or at least like people when the Kickstarter was happening, a lot of people asked me like, can I play Wanderhome solo? What's the maximum number of people I need to play Wanderhome? And my response is always like, this is how many people I play tested with, right? Like I play tested like from 3 to 6, but like I can foresee like a solo Wanderhome game and that working effectively, following the rules as are written in the book, and I can see a 20-person West Marches style Wanderhome campaign where like you've got characters that are rotating in and out, and like you'll have like 8-hour long sitting around a table talking about the sunset or whatever. And like those are both like extremely reasonable and valid ways to play. And frankly, if it wasn't COVID, I would gladly be. I just have a bunch of friends over and like, play hex scroll Wanderhome or whatever. Like why not, right?
Why not?
I've done 16-person Under Hollow Hills, which was really like if I can do that with Under Hollow Hills, I can do that with Wanderhome.
See, and that's something. Try and do that with a GM and be like, all right, now you heard all 20 of these people in this game. I believe in you. Pat pat. Goodbye.
That was something that was when I ran the Under Hollow Hills game. It started as a GM game where it was like me running it for all these people. And Under Hollow Hills is a Powered by the Apocalypse system, so it's like me running all these people, like giving me their thoughts. But what started to happen after like a session of being like, oh, I can't do this, is I would deputize GMs. So whenever there was like a scene where it was like, oh, I'm doing it with this group of people, friend, like JJ, can you take that group and go on the boat, and like you're off the boat, on the creek, and like talk about what's going on over there and figure that out, and then come back to me and tell me what you learned and like what happened to you, and I'll integrate it back into what I'm doing over here. And like, like there just hits a point when you're running a game with that many people where you start being like, all right, I know you've got this character, but I'm also giving you this NPC.
Actually, like,
where like it just stops it. Yeah.
Well, I like whenever I'm really glad that you brought that up, because like whenever I hear about people who are like, oh yeah, we're doing like big like 5e events where it's like a mega dungeon and it's like 3 GMs running 3 separate parties in the same dungeon, and like I hear people like, oh, and like that we've done like this fun thing where like a spell or when you die you jump to another group or whatever, and I'm like, you're playing a mega GM-less game, like you're playing technically you're like you've broken what GM does and split it up, and it kind of loops back to this like idea that I want to say out to a panel of people who are watching GM-less games is, again, like a GM-less does not necessarily have to mean like, oh, you've spread everything out equally, or even just like there isn't a GM or whatever. It's more like, I think, like like how do you, like, what does it mean to break the mold of one person knows everything and like just singular things, and it's like how do you kind of change up, get everybody involved, and it's always always excites me to hear when people do stuff like that.
yeah, absolutely. No, I'm big there with you. Absolutely.
God.
that was, and it was also with 16-year-olds. It was like a bunch of teenagers, and it was like,
imagine.
It was yeah. It was honestly, I think, frankly, some of the most fun role playing I've had in a while. But it was also like I'd do it and then like need to take a nap for the next 2 days. But like,
yeah. I can bet. The game group that I have here is me plus 2 other people, and the one time that I GM'd for them, I was like, I can't. Y'all are too much work. I can't. Just do the thing correctly. Come on. But yeah. So you guys have both made like a ton of GM-less games. I actually went through your itch.io pages before this, and I was like, I feel like this is multiplied since the last time I looked. So like, what do you have any like tips, like people trying to make GM-less games? Like, how do you keep it balanced between players? How do you make it so that players don't just who are maybe used to games that have a GM, like monopolizing kind of the time and energy there?
Oh.
That's right. I brought questions.
Yeah, well, my first foray into making a GM-less game was dedicated to spreading, like spreading weight of what a GM would be. And I think that's like a perfectly fine place to start, where you like, I think like a good way to think about it is you break down what you want, like what you want players to do. Like that's kind of, when it comes to design, that's always like what my first thing is what I want my players to do. Or feel, right? Like, or whatever, right? Like, it's just like, and then I think it's like, how do you make it so that everybody can do that? Like, there isn't one person who's like, just because I think that's like an easy way to kind of start with it, where it's like, what's something like, usually it's kind of like, how do you get, for me, it was like, how do I get people to not step over each other, right? And so like a good way is to just do like a pretty simple like rotating camera thing. So it's like, here, you lead a scene. That doesn't mean you're like so it's kind of like everybody's a GM for one scene kind of mentality. That was like my initial foray into like GMless design, was like, okay, so like you have a scene leader who sets it up, but then it opens it up, and like you eventually play towards a roll, like a rolling of the dice, and then usually after that you swap who's in the lead. So it's always like one person. That was just like how I got started, and thinking about that was like, okay, how do I kind of get it moving? And it's very directed, right? Like I brought that up earlier, where it's like my GM design is like, it's pretty directed, so like hopefully people aren't stepping on each other's toes. There's like safety nets in place in the mechanics itself, right? To stop that.
Yeah. One of the things I love about this panel, Viditya, is that you and I have completely different completely different ways of writing GMless games. Like I feel like I think people, they think of like, oh, BOB, and I feel like you and I are like, we are doing just fundamentally very different things and like that's what I love about this panel, is that we're getting two really good different perspectives here. Because I'm hearing your advice and I'm like, wow, I have the same, like I run into the same things you do, and my solutions are very different than yours. Where for me, I think a really crucial thing that a GM does that you can oftentimes not always get in a GMless game is that the GM has the capacity to set the conversational tone, right? In this, like when the GM comes into the conversation a certain way, that is the approach by which the conversation will occur. And the GM is not the sole arbitrator of that, but the GM is given a lot of capacity to articulate that. In Dungeons and Dragons, or like in games like that, the GM is the one who gets to be like, oh, this is going to be a grimdark game, or like this is going to be a sad game. Like we all know that they don't have ultimate power, but they can do that. And so the thing that I always try to do in terms of like dealing with jerks and dealing with like people who want conflicting things out of a game is I try to make the game set the tone as forcefully and specifically as possible in a way that's more important to me than, again, the mechanical rules of the game. Like I said this in the Lyric Game panel, which again was a half hour ago. Recall. The most important rule in Wanderhome, the two most important rules in Wanderhome to me are there is no violence here anymore, and you are alive. And neither of those are mechanical rules. Like the token-based meta economy is like you could replace that with whatever you wanted, and you'd still have Wanderhome. But if you cut either of those two things I just said, I think you wouldn't have the same game anymore. And because it's so much about the tone settings, way of getting everyone on the same conversational page, and then the mechanisms by which we navigate that conversation is up to the way we talk. And that's my perspective.
How do you feel about this statement? So like, because again, it's the same thing where it's like I agree with so much of what you're saying, and then I'm like, oh, but I didn't get there. Like I went,
yeah, that was my reaction to what you said. Yeah.
So like, because to me, I think the phrase that's like echoing in my head is, when I make a GMless game, I am the GM for that table, right? Like in my design, anytime you play Space Between Stars, you are playing the game that I designed. I know that's like a weird way, but it's like it is. You don't have a GM at your table because spiritually I am your GM, right? Like and like the story that I want you to tell is structured because I structured it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Therefore, like you can't really like you can't really like break away from that. I mean, you can because it's a role play, you do whatever you
Yeah.
want. But it's like breaking away from that is like kind of purposefully doing so, rather than again in a game where like if I was actually sitting there as your GM, like I would be like, fuck it, yeah, we'll do whatever. You know what I mean? Like there's just
yeah, absolutely.
so like how do you feel about kind of that statement as like as a GM designer, we are kind of GMs of every game?
I feel like I wanna shift it slightly because I'm there with you. I think that is very much an important part of how I design GMless games, is that kind of thinking of like, how do I want the game? What is the kind of game I want to give to you?
Yeah.
But a really I think crucial thing is like sorry, I just had a brain fog moment. Like games exist as a conversation, right? Like that's an old Forge thing, right? As a game is a conversation. And the conversation in GMless games, it's a conversation, but it's also a conversation with the book you're holding. And it's a conversation with your character sheets and your pencils and your dice or no dice or tokens or, like everything around you is part of the conversation too. And so in that framework, right, like a GM is a part of a conversation, and the GM has their way of introducing things to the conversation, and I'm part of the conversation. I've got my way of introducing things to the conversation. And so like the text becomes the text gains the capacity to provide things that a GM normally does instead of the text, I think. And it's like, I'm there with you. I think I phrase it in my own weird little like, hi, I live in the woods and I write games about, like staring at the trees and crying or whatever.
Right.
my own little, like forests. I live under a rock and,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about it as if it's like, well, I am a space station and you live on me.
Kinda like exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
No, geez, I love that.
Very good.
Also, because like there's something that I think I'm really glad that we're on this panel together, because I feel like we both came to the same conclusion, and you said it first. I remember this because you said the words first, and then I was like, okay, you said the words. Can I talk about it? I think like we're both like, so we make GMless games, sure, but they're not really. And like you coined the term, at least was the first word, it was GM agnostic, and I'm like, this is exactly what I've been thinking about for a long time in my own design. And I like that it's like that, this like constant convergence of what's happening.
Yeah.
Really
yeah, absolutely.
Oh geez.
I'm loving this. I'm just hanging out here, just listening to you guys talk.
Also, just to note, just because it was going off in chat a little bit, I said mechanical rules and other rules. I did air quotes when I said them because I don't actually think there's a distinction there. I do think that they are all identical rules, that when you look at like the token economy and a BOB system, that is the exact same thing that I'm trying to tell you as when you look at a game and see like there's no violence here anymore. Like those are both the same level of like, take this, I hope you find it useful, in like in a little bit of an OSR way, but like I don't think that there's a meaningful way of drawing a line there, and I don't really want to try. I just use that because I know that there's some people out there who care very strongly about, if a game doesn't have dice, it's not a game.
Or whatever.
Or whatever. What's that thing that the Forge used to talk about that was like, like you must have different things responsible for the input, output, blah blah, whatever. So yeah.
Oh geez.
Okay. We have 50 minutes, yeah. Do we want to go into questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do some questions from the chat. I believe we have a omnipotent presence to...
I am Mickey, your disembodied question asker, and I have several questions, as a matter of fact. So, the first one I have...
Oh, Mickey, you cut out.
Okay, so here's the... Yeah. Here's the first question. Sorry about the cutout. This first one is you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but let's see if you can tease it out a bit. Tome of Tomes wanted to know, What types of GM-less games or mechanics do you feel do a really good job of distributing the narrative authority in the spotlight?
I feel like I could probably do 100-part thread after this topic with links to games that do it all in each in a completely different way. I don't know if you do you have any what's your top 3, Viditya?
Wait, sorry, maybe I missed a little bit of the question. Could you repeat it again?
Sure. What types of GM-less games or mechanics do you feel do a good job of distributing narrative authority in the spotlight?
Yeah. That's what I thought. Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah, there's so many of them because again, GM-less games isn't a single a GM'd game has a GM. You're like, cool. But GM-less games break the mold in so many varied ways that it's it's hard for me to do that. Here, I'll throw one out because I also saw a question here which was and I don't know if it's going to be on the list, but I can hit 2 birds with 1 stone, and this is a pun. I'll get to it. Is a game that kind of clicked mystery to me, like an investigation game that's also GM-less, because it's how do you do a mystery game without how do you kind of ramp up and have hidden information? It's wait, I have it. It's B-Town Detectives. Because its resource is just you roll dice and there's a clue tracker, and when you roll above a certain number and you add where you are on the clue tracker, you've solved the case. So it's you kind of take turns, keep doing this, and you're collaboratively making this, but there is still a thing where everybody on the table is well, we're either going to get it or we flub the roll and we got to do another scene. And you're kind of all there for it. And it's this and I just, it's a GM-less game. It's GM optional, but I think the GM-less option is more fun.
I am going to drop a game that I have not read in a hot second, so it might be GM-less, but I'm pretty sure it is. It is also a pretty lyrical game. However, and I've yet to play it, however, I do think its mechanics are really notable. It's by Nat Libre. It's called Anti-Cis for Kids, or Natalie Libre's Indie Kids Menu. And the reason why I love it and why it's so influential for me, for the opposite reason that Viditya loved that game, is because one mechanic in it, where on your character sheet there are those hearts and stars kind of scattered around. And the game doesn't tell you what you use them for, but when you feel something has happened where you cross off a heart, or you color in a heart, or you circle a heart, or whatever, you draw another star, those are meaningful in-game events that have meaningful narrative consequences, but the game does not tell you what mechanisms those are. It just simply invites you, here's a game with some things to color, and you are going to build something iteratively from these fidget toys I've given you that I won't explain. I won't tell you what to do with these hearts, but you might decide that when you run out of them, that's when you die, right? That might be a thing that makes sense here. But it's this little it's a game that doesn't presume what you'll do with it. It just gives you a tone and then a bunch of little things you get to play with. And so that was super influential for me for the opposite reason.
No, I love Anti-Cis for Kids. It also was kind of a brain opener where I was oh shit, wait. I love the idea of just being here are things, do what you want, It's so freeing, and it's literally just do what you want. Decide for yourself the narrative that you want.
I've been working on a GM-less game for about a year now. That's built on that set of principles of I'm not going a game that gives you tools and it's become this 70,000 word behemoth. But it started off of this desire to make a game where I don't know what you're gonna do with the game when I give it to you. And it's GM-less, and you can get it on my Patreon, patreon.com/AdragsKey. Subscribe, and you can join my Discord.
Totally. We have 10 minutes left, I think. So if we want to do another question.
Yeah, let's get another question.
Sure. Okay. So Rigadoon would like to know, What are some ways that you can handle pacing when designing a GM-less game?
Ooh. I like this question because I think every GM-less game I've made handles this differently. Because again, it kind of has to do with, I think GM-less games. I was about to say something but no, I was going to take it back. I was gonna say, GM-less games have to consider genre more than other games do, but that's a lie, personally.
That's a lie. Yeah, I think that's not true, but I like the sentiment.
But like, you do kind of have to present genre to more people, I feel, right? Like, so you're like, hey, how you pace it is very important. So like, how do you, I don't know, it kind of depends. Like, if you want something that's frantic, then maybe don't put structure to it, right? Where it's like, everybody at the table is just constantly adding to it and bringing something, and like, you're just moving forward as the table wants to, versus something that's maybe like, I think like horror GM-less games do a really good job of being like, this is how it's paced, because like there is, and like, it could be slow or faster, but it's like they feel a little bit more structured, the ones that I've played, where you're like, oh, like we're ramping, or like there is something here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I think again, also my games all come to very different conclusions. Like, Sleepaway has like a rigid 3-act structure, and it's like very invested in pacing and like using mechanics to, build pacing in ways that players might not notice, but like it does when you follow them. Wanderhome doesn't believe pacing exists, and if you try to care about it, the game gets mad at you. The game I mentioned, the 70,000 word behemoth, Yazebas, has different moods you can play it in that tell you what your character sheet means in different ways, and then the mood dictates the mechanism by which pacing occurs, and it's episodic and chapter based. And like, I feel like you can just really come at this like 100 different ways based on like what matters to you about the pacing, right? Like, because pacing is like, like you might be trying to make a game that has a very solid rhythm to it, right? Like, a lot of GM-less games have that. A lot of your GM-less games have that, where they've got like a rhythm and like a way in which they become a pattern. And then other GM-less games might not care at all about that. And I feel like both of those kind of are ways of thinking about pacing.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fascinating question, because it's like hard to answer.
How do GM'd games care about pacing? How does Dragons care about pacing?
Exactly.
I kind of feel like I don't know how many games I've read that care about pacing.
It's like, I think like, to maybe give a little bit of direction is like, when it comes to me, like, so I came into tabletop design from board games, and so like pacing is just in my brain, because I'm like, board games are paced games. So like, it's GM-less, but it's like it's a rotating GM. Space Goblins is literally phase based. So like, you are playing phases of the game, and because of that, it is very structured, and its pace is flexible, because you can say how many rotations of these phases you play, and then you just have fun and you play until you're done. And so like, that's kind of like a place if you want the structure, because I think the no structure is a little easier to be like, fucking have fun. But board games maybe is a good place to look for GM-less structure.
Yeah, and I think as a similar thing, Wanderhome is like a game that, yeah, again, like Wanderhome, I think you can play forever. You can play for 30 minutes, and like you're doing the same Wanderhome. But then like Sleepaway, it's like, like I think Sleepaway was me writing it, being like, oh god, how do I care about pacing in a GM-less game? Like, what tools do I have to do that if I don't have a GM? And Wanderhome was like, stop worrying about that, Jay. It's gonna be okay. Just give them some lists. Give them a lot of lists, and they'll figure it out, and they'll be good.
God, I love it.
I counted how many lists there were in the game, and I got dizzy. It was like 450 or something.
So many.
So many. It's worse than OSR with tables.
Okay,
that's
so
the area.
Go ahead, AC. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think that's where, like, For the Queen has that fantastic mechanic where you can put the end card wherever you want in the deck, and it's just that That game's incredible.
How did I not?
For the Queen's good.
How did I not mention For the Queen was another
Yeah.
game that just like broke my brain. I was like, wait, fuck. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So one more time. I know that all of you have said this at various points during the panel, but just remind everybody who you are, where you can be reached online, and what your latest, most exciting project is that people can get invested in, and then we'll wrap it all up.
I can. You wanna?
You go first.
Okay. I'm Jay Dragon. I don't use pronouns. You can find me at JDragski on Twitter. You can also support me on Patreon at patreon.com/JDragski. I'm the publisher for Possum Creek Games. You can find us at Possum_Creek. My most recent project is Wanderhome, which I've talked about a fair bit. It's a GM agnostic pastoral fantasy RPG about a group of traveling animal folk and the world they discover along the way. You can pre-order it right now. There's a fair few people who really like it. I've heard it's pretty good. You can get it at wanderhome.backerkit.com. Over to you.
I've been and continue to be Viditya Voleti. You can find me on Twitter at Viditya Voleti, and you can find my games at vidityavoleti.itch.io. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Viditya Voleti. I also stream on Twitch. That's the thing I do now more. Same thing, twitch.tv/Viditya Voleti. I have a lot of fun there. And I think a project that I'm really excited about, I just released 2 games. Actually, they're in like a world building bundle. They're both GM-less. They're both world building GM-less games. One is called Elaine Wants Magic, which is I call it a post-fantasy world building game because it asks you to deconstruct and evolve fantasy tropes that are either harmful or just dated, or just Western. Like a lot of my my non-Western culture kind of comes into it. And then We Who Seek Titans, which is like a kind of pseudo map making game that's about journey. It's like reading and working on Wanderhome made me go, hey, I need to finish this game because it's my journey game. It's my game crossing the land.
Also, I forgot to mention it, but Viditya is doing work on Wanderhome, and I'm really excited. Yeah.
I'm very excited. Yeah, I think those are my stuff. AC, how about you?
Thank you. So my name is AC. You can find me online at resident_Corvid, pretty much anywhere, I think. And I work at Indie Press Revolution. You can find us at IPR Tweets, IPR Facebook. There's IPR YouTube, which is mainly what I work on, really, is I do a lot of YouTube stuff. But also, hopefully, the internet here is not great. But I'm currently attempting to upload a rather long video where the IPR crew is playing a game that Jason Walters, the CEO of IPR, created called Symposium. It's based on the Descended from the Queen system, and you play as you answer philosophical questions from the perspectives of different Greek philosophies. It's absolutely fantastic. We had a fantastic time playing it. We managed to drag in someone who has an actual philosophy degree. So yeah, look for that video, hopefully early next week. And it's just it's so fantastic. I love it every single time we play. It's just get to know what your friends really think about everything, but also make them be cynicists and stuff. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for having. Okay, so first of all, this panel was the largest audience of the day so far. So yay to the audience and to the panelists for that. We oftentimes we tend to want to invite people, any of you panelists who are available, to come on over to the main Metatopia Discord. Look for the panel watch party channel. It's a text channel, and people can ask some of the questions I didn't get a chance to ask, and have more discussion about this topic over there if anybody wants to go over there. So other than that, thank you everybody for a super great panel, and have a great Metatopia.
Thank you so much, Mikey. Thank you, AC.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, chat. It was so lovely to get your questions.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank you so
okay.
much. Yes.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Sweet.